up, but just got a quick notice before 2:30 we're going to have to go into public exclude at 2:30 because Kahanunu are coming in at that point. So, and we may have to go in and out. Would you open our meeting for us, please?
Acknowledging the assembly of our councillors, the regional councillors meeting. Ko tā koe mihi kia tātou e hui tahi nei. E puhia nei e tahau, ua hia nei e te ua, e whitia nei e te rā, gathered together by the elements in terms of the kaupapa in front of us. Ka tika kia mihi ki o tātou nei mata, ngā taumahatanga kei rungi ngā pokohiwi, acknowledging those, our forebears, who have positioned us in terms of the responsibilities and the positions of today. Ka tika ka mihi kia rātou, acknowledging those who have passed away recently in your families and in ours. Ka tika kia mihi kia tangihia kia poroporaki kia rātou. It's appropriate to offer eulogies to them, to send them on and leave us here. Kei ngā mahuetanga e tutuki he rā e tātou. Me no i tātou, he karakia. I think after about a year's time, 12 months, we might all be able to say the same karakia, respectively around the table. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kine kiu, te kia mā taratara ki tai. Kia hi ake ana te ata kura he teo, he huka, he hau hu ti hei mauri ora. Cease the winds from the west, those from the south. The blending characteristics that gives us weather of the day from both land and from the coastal regions. Touch of sleet, touch of frost, a red-tipped dawn, the promise of a glorious day in front of us. Tēnā tātou.
Thank you, and I bet in 12 months we can all say it as well as that.
Absolutely.
I don't know about as well as.
That's what I need.
An aspiration.
Have you got the word raw here right yet?
Unfortunately, I've got you on my side to correct me on everything. You're not correcting my English yet, which is a wonder. Okay, so conflict of interests. We have none, I wouldn't imagine, on any of the subjects today. Confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting. I read them, but I don't know where I'll put them now. Don't have them in front of me. Do you have them in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I just borrow them. I must be in my files. Okay, for correction.
Excluded ones.
We have the public excluded ones. We'll do them in public excluded, yeah. Do we have a mover that the minutes are correct? Tom, seconder? Rick's still reading them, that's fine.
No.
Fenton, sorry Fenton. The move and second, all those in favour? Aye. Minutes are approved, thank you very much. Follow-ups from the previous regional council.
Chair will just take this by exception.
Minutes, actions from the
Matters arising.
that's the term I'm looking for, on the minutes,
Oh, you've got some matters arising that not on the agenda, Tom? Yes?
page 6.
Page six.
Item 6 refers to the vote that was taken on the transfer of a water consent. Has the window for appealing our decision to make that a publicly notified consent expired?
My preliminary view, which I'd need to confirm, is that the window would have expired, but I'll double check that for you.
And so likely that we have not been challenged on that decision.
That's correct.
Are there any other matters arising that are not on the agenda? I'll move forward then. Follow-ups? Questions on the follow-ups? Yes, Paul?
Chair, the minutes from the Toki Water Task Force, and this my question is that there was also mentioned that the meeting last night that there was potential to be a plan change for Plan Change 6, an update on that. And I was just wondering, given that the Regional Planning Committee has already turned down such a request twice, what's been offered that's different than has previously been brought to the Regional Planning Committee?
Look, my understanding is that when the Regional Planning Committee last discussed this, there was an indication that if there was new information to hand, that the Regional Planning Committee would be prepared to reconsider it. And we've received formally a letter from the task force making this request. The nature, I guess, of the additional information is we've now got a body of work which the task force is overseeing in terms of the transition for the irrigation community to the new flow limits, and we've also got a now signed off program of science that came through the long-term plan that wasn't previously confirmed in terms of a better understanding of the aquifer system. And so our proposal is that on the basis of having received that letter, that there will be a paper going to the Regional Planning Committee on the 12th of December, reporting that this letter has been received and seeking some direction from the committee as to how it wants to treat it going forward.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that, Chair? James, does a delay of a year or 2 years or whatever number of years involve a limited plan change, or can we agree to do that as part of the implementation process?
It requires a plan change. And the question is whether we use the fast track provisions which were recently enacted, which will be something we would need ministerial approval on. On the face of it, it meets the criteria for a fast track plan change, but we just need to weigh up the costs and risks around that as well.
Debbie, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I have a question around the pecuniary interest that we have with one of the councillors and the Bay Bars advertising, and we sat here in a workshop and we were discussing how important it was that everything was clean and clear and there were to be no conflicts. And at the time I raised the question, what about advertising with Bay Bars? And Councillor Hawke seconded me, said she's quite right, and I was assured by the staff that due to the timelines there was no advertising through Bay Bars with our port consultation. And now I see through an OIO request that there has been, OIR request, that there has been. So what are the implications for this whole process now that we have a councillor with pecuniary interest who's been advising in here?
So my understanding is that we have acquired something of a regular slot in recent times for communication of council business in Bay Bars, and the port consultation has fallen into that category with respect to the half-page advertisement. The addition of the two-page flyer didn't involve any payment to Bay Bars, so the only payment that's been made is for the half-page advertisement. I would suggest that the level of pecuniary interest, once the costs of that are deducted from the $800, what might fall through to the councillor in this regard would be an extremely small amount. And I think the important context is that there has been use of this publication for a number of other purposes over the last 12 months. So it hasn't been particularly around the port. I'm not aware of staff giving any confirmation that there wouldn't be advertising in Bay Bars.
I remember them sitting right here. But the other concern is it's an undeclared pecuniary interest, and I have concerns about that too, because if this is undeclared, what else is undeclared?
Well, point of order, Mr. Chair. It's entirely the prerogative of the person involved to declare any interests, and if they don't, it's entirely their prerogative. They don't have to declare.
If they don't, then it's a matter for the Auditor General. And what number was your point of order, Councillor Curtin?
What was that, Councillor?
You had a point of order, but I didn't hear the number, and it wasn't a point of order at all.
Oh, take a hike.
Settle down, everyone.
Yeah,
Chair, could I just note that the decision to advertise in Bay Bars has not been a decision of councillors. It's been a staff decision that's been taken independently. So certainly from my perspective, at no point in this process has a councillor directed either directly or indirectly this advertising. This has been a decision taken, and I think we recognise that Bay Bars has a has a track record and a circulation in the regional market that makes it an appropriate vehicle for council communication. So I don't have any concerns about the staff side of this in terms of the declaration of any interest. It's a matter that I'd leave to you, Chair, and to councillors.
Jim? Could Mr Palmer advise us what the general rule is these days on obtaining audit approval for, in effect, contracts between the council and elected members?
So there is some guidance historically on that, which I have cited previously. I don't know that there's anything particularly recently that's come from the Office of the Auditor General. I'd prefer to come back to you with a view on whether or not there's any particular issues that this gives rise to. But look,
I'm not just concerned about this, but I believe councillors need to know for their own protection. I mean, I think back to when I was over the road there, and my namesake, Ian Dick, major contractor, was quite often involved in contracts with Napier City Council, and on each occasion, audit consent was required.
so there is
And it was generally given.
yes, so there's a scale question here. Mrs Hooper has just brought to my attention, and I'd need to confirm this offline, but there appears to be something of a de minimis of something in the order of $25,000 per year in terms of materiality. And given that this is a relatively small transaction, it's likely to fall below anything that would require any approval formally in terms of that. So I'll look into it.
Could we
and come
just
back to you.
get confirmation on that and maybe email advice?
Sure, that's fine.
Just for clarification, from my point of view, nobody talked to me about whether we go to Profit or Baybuzz or, so I didn't know anything about it, but in hindsight, I'm not worried. I think it's fine. It's another publication, just like the Profit. I read the Profit this morning and I noticed we had advertised them there, and I read Baybuzz. Hope you did. It was pretty good. Pretty good editorial this time, and but I didn't notice. Perhaps I was concentrating on other things. So I'm not worried.
May I speak to this issue, or would I be deepening my conflict of interest?
I don't think we should pursue the.
Well, I do have a concern about this, and it is my publication that is on the table here.
Yeah, but it's not worth pursuing further, Tom.
Okay,
Okay, go on then.
I mean, whether some councillors like it or not, Baybuzz is a legitimate media publication in this market that I would submit is read by more influencers than any other publication in this market. And it is an excellent forum for this organization to tell its story, whether that is via advertising or via editorial that we independently generate, such as in our next issue. The next issue will include an article on the local impacts of global warming. It'll include a article on our civil defense team and its efforts to educate us on the threat of tsunami, and so forth. It also will include an article regarding what our science team is doing to more accurately determine what kind of water is in our aquifers, as described at last night's meeting in Central Hawke's Bay. So I would hate to see this discussion have any chilling effect on the staff making a prudent business and marketing decision as to where this organization should get its story told. That's why I want to raise the issue now, because I know my staff will be diligently pursuing advertising from Hawke's Bay Regional Council in the future, and they're not going to stop, and hopefully the advertising won't stop.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, my point is not necessarily to criticise this arrangement, but that councillors and staff should know what are the legal rules that are there to protect them and avoid people getting themselves into trouble.
Yeah, I think we're going to move on to that. Are there any other...
Chair, Thank you. Just in regard to the walnut trees, I see here the response I've had is we agree to disagree with Bostock New Zealand on the facts. I mean, if I go back to the newspaper article, he was quoted as saying he had 3 independent witnesses to say he did have permission. So if it wasn't staff that gave him permission, who was it?
So, look, this discussion happened, as noted here, in the field. We had a staff member who was in discussion with 3 Bostock staff members in the field. When this issue subsequently blew up and we went to investigate what had happened, our staff member who was in the field had one recollection of events, and the 3 Bostock staff members had a different version of events. Those 3 on the Bostock side were prepared to swear an affidavit for their version. Our staff member was prepared to swear an affidavit for his version. Because there is no written record, there was no way of reconciling that, and I don't think either party saw it appropriate to pursue it in the courts.
So your view, no other party was involved?
That's correct.
Right.
Yep.
Pretty simple. If you told us that 3 months ago when asked Mr. C, I wouldn't have had to do this. So.
Right. I thought I had.
Well, I didn't receive any
Right.
advice at
Right.
that time. So.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a exact recollection of what happened.
I'll move, Chair.
I'll move.
Have a second, Chair.
Moved and second. All those in favour of accepting?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Follow-ups. Call for minor items not on the agenda.
I'm happy to give an update on the Central Hawke's Bay Public Water meeting for those who went there last night, Chair.
Okay, Central. No, any others? I want to give an update on the Tamata Park track. No others, then we'll close. That'll be the 2 we do. Just something I forgot too, just a reminder that Gary Clode is having his official leaving tonight for councillors, so if you can hang around for that, that would be really excellent.
So just a reminder, it's not here, it is down at McLean Park at the Chapman Pavilion.
Oh,
Yep.
McLean Park, that's right.
Yep.
Well, that's
The numbers were too large to squeeze into.
Well, that's a statement. We've got to hire McLean Park for his going away.
Maybe Bill gave it to us free.
14,000 too much.
Heat on who takes the next
Who's
one.
kicking off?
And Mr. Chairman, you also got second in the raffle.
Yeah, he got second in the raffle too yesterday at the Maori Committee. Okay, thank you. Decision items. Now, see Campbell has joined us. The floor is yours, mate. Hawke's Bay Regional Pest Management Plan. There's been a huge amount of work done on this. Do you want to talk to it?
So thank you all. I'm going to very briefly just say this item is being led by Mark Mitchell, who has effectively led the entire process over what has really been the last 18 months. So I'll pass it over to Mark.
Thanks, mate.
Kia ora koutou. So the paper before you outlines the process undertaken in reviewing the Regional Pest Management Plan and the hearing panel recommendations on the plan. This plan is a statutory requirement under the Biosecurity Act, but I must point out this is just one component of the broader biosecurity program here at Hawke's Bay Regional Council. The review was initiated early 2017 when the Biosecurity Working Party was formed. That consisted of 3 councillors and 3 members of the Regional Planning Committee. They acted as in an advisory role as per the terms of reference. We then released a 24-page discussion document mid last year where we received 98 submissions, and that feedback, along with continued engagement with stakeholders, was used to develop the proposed plan. So that proposed plan was released February this year, where we received 54 submissions. And as per the paper, the hearing panel, through delegated authority of council, undertook the hearing process and has made its recommendations as per attachment 1. Now, I understand attachment 1 with its appendices was quite a large document, but that's the process of ticking off the key sections in the Biosecurity Act. The hearing panel recommendations are now before you as a council for adoption as council's decision on the plan, as per section 75 of the Biosecurity Act. I'd just like to finally say this has been a fairly rigorous 2-year process, but as a result I feel as though the plan is certainly robust, and it's another step up from previous regional pest management strategies. And I'd also like to thank the hearing panel members for their leadership and their energy and the time of which they put into this process, along with the members of the original Biosecurity Working Party. So questions?
Right, questions? I have one. I have a couple. I'm pleased to see feral cats, feral goats are in. Feral cats, are they in or out?
Yep, feral cats are in. Yes.
Are in.
Yep. They are declared
They're in the plan and out of it.
Yeah, no, I got it there. You just wouldn't put it in this.
This is the additions. These are things that have been added.
Okay.
Yep.
The 200 metre good neighbour rule. So just, Joe, explain that to me.
So we cannot bind the Crown through any rule but a good neighbour rule. So the good neighbour rule is where the adjacent landowner must manage that pest to prevent it from spreading to adjacent properties. So the good neighbour rule would be around the, say, a possum control area. The adjacent landowner needs to make sure within a 200 metre area from the boundary of the neighbour into their property has possums at or below 5%. In order to do that, they will have to control a much larger area, of course, and that's something we will actively manage for forestry companies and others.
Okay, thank you. We want you. Oh, I thought you were pointing at someone. You need to be a bit more assertive.
This is slightly away from the plan because I see in 17.1 goats are included. But I just note for the predator-free mahia, and I had the Minister of Conservation in my truck going at the end, and the farm manager there said that he hadn't seen a possum for 5 years, but Ngāwhena Rahui had covenanted that area, and we shot 3,500 goats over a 2-year period, and I presume they weren't just on that farm. So is there any reason why goats aren't in that predator-free plan?
Good question.
So I think there's a couple of things there. The first thing is that Whakatupu Mahia, predator-free, which is now called, is focusing initially on predator control and possum eradication to start with. But there is already a conversation right now, and we're having that with DOC, and we've started it with Ngā Whenua Rahui at a regional level about the possibility of actually eradicating goats on Mahia Peninsula, because we think that's an absolute opportunity. And so predator-free Mahia will in time include a wider range of things than just predators, and goats is probably likely to be the first thing on the list.
That would be great. So, Tom.
Well, I would like to move the adoption of the recommendation.
I just got a couple more questions, Tom. Have you got?
Oh, just around Wilding Pine. And just looking in the paper itself, I haven't waded through the thing, but I'm just interested in what consequences look like if people fail to meet the 17.3, 31, 32, 3 through 35. What are our powers if that's happening? If we've established that there is an issue and no one's doing anything about it?
So with regards to the Wilding Conifer program, there's several components. One is Pinus contorta. That's declared progressive containment throughout the region. So we don't want Pinus contorta. So if you have Pinus contorta on your land, you are required to remove it. However, we need to be a bit pragmatic about that because there are some land holdings that have very large amounts of Pinus contorta. So we are working with them in forming management programs and controlling Pinus contorta over time. We've also added in a Scots Mountain and Dwarf Mountain Pine program, and that's primarily around the ranges because that's where they're most likely to be weedy. And again, that will be just working with landowners and removing some shelter belts and whatnot. There's very few known areas that have those particular pine species. And then finally, the wilding conifer program, that comes in behind the work that MPI are doing. There's a bid in nationally at the moment for $100 million for the National Wilding Conifer Program, of which we will be partnering up with them. This program is around if we go in and remove wilding conifers and get them to very low levels, there will then be a requirement for the landowner to try and maintain that long term as opposed to letting it revert.
But that doesn't include dock, other than 200 metres, and considering it's windborne,
Yes.
It seems a anomaly.
I know we are hamstrung by the Biosecurity Act. That's all we can bind dock to. We can't bind them to anything.
I've got a follow-up question. Are we doing any research on the best ways to minimise or to deal with contorta pine? Because I know at the moment people go up there and just simply cut them down a certain height, but a certain size seems to be very labour intensive and differently. I just thought we must be other ways in which we can find to deal with contorta, Pinus contorta.
Yeah, so the National Wilding Conifer Program are doing large amounts of research, particularly in the South Island, of course, through aerial spraying, and they're also looking at how to re-establish native forest post-spraying because aerial spraying can have an impact on native species and that regeneration can take some time. So there is quite a bit of money being put into that research space. You are absolutely right in saying some of the current processes do seem pretty old school, but they are developing that space pretty rapidly.
Hey, Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Chilean needlegrass. So I remember coming on this council 5 years ago and first starting to read about that particular pest, and at that stage it might have been on maybe 4 or 5 farms in a relatively confined part of Hawke's Bay. Now it seems to be in pretty much every district, and it covers many hundreds of hectares. I think 700 plus, I think, is the number that I recall from reading this. It seems to me that it's out of control now. So I'm wondering whether amongst the submissions there were some alternative management methods that were suggested and whether they were considered by the panel or how they were considered.
So we're not even sure when Chilean needlegrass arrived in Hawke's Bay, but it's pinpointed back to roughly the 1930s. The team is still discovering populations today because it is that hard to identify. Some farms are completely covered in Chilean needlegrass and have been so for some time. I can't give you accurate figures. That would have to be from Darren Underhill Pest Plants, but it certainly hasn't rocketed off. I would have thought there were many more properties than that during that time period you mentioned, just because of how long it's been in Hawke's Bay. The issue with Chilean needlegrass, well, there's a couple of issues. One, you can only identify it whilst it's seeding. Even the experts can't identify it throughout the rest of the year. It just looks like grass. Secondly, when you control Chilean needlegrass being a grass, you will be removing all the other grasses with it. It's literally scorched earth, and the longevity of the seed life could be 50 plus years. You're talking long term. So literally those affected landowners would have to change their land use, whether it's putting it into forestry or whatnot. And even then, dispersal of seed, it would be difficult to manage. So I don't accept that it's blowing out and it's out of control, but it is a very, very difficult weed to manage. So we've got to balance up property rights with what's actually going to have a real impact on the ground. And our team feel as though they are managing it. But again, I'd have to let Darren Underhill really talk to that. Campbell might be able to add more.
So just, I think from recollection, and we'll get you the actual numbers, councillor, but when I became biosecurity manager in 2006, I believe there was around, at that stage, 140 properties with chilling needlegrass in the region.
140.
140. So I'll get those figures for you, though.
So why do we even have a plan if it's so widespread?
If we didn't have a plan, it would be everywhere. So we're currently about
Sounds like it is everywhere.
roughly 700 hectares, we think. You know, it's a lot more land in our region than that. And it is still confined to certain areas. If we were to walk away from it, it would not only cover our entire region, it would move off to other regions as well across New Zealand. So I think there's 3 regions in New Zealand that have us, Marlborough and Canterbury. So.
Thank you.
And
Tom,
we did invite the team from Marlborough to come up and talk to us about it.
Tom, are you moving to second recommendations?
I'll move to adopt the recommendation, yes.
Second, you wish to speak, Tom?
Yes. First of all, I want to commend Mark, who did a brilliant job. We must have generated dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of questions in the course of this process, including questions from our submitters and so forth. And everything was chased down. If we asked for what's happening in other parts of the country on this, or what are other councils doing, or what have you, that was chased down. So I think Mark has done just a terrific job under the watchful eye of Campbell to satisfy all of the information needs that we had in the process. I'd also like to compliment John Simmons, who is our independent chair, and he was fastidious, I might say to a fault, but he was very, very thorough I mean, we went through every single submission line by line and charts of what issues have been raised and how have we responded and so forth and so on. It was a very remarkable, thorough process in terms of reviewing what's in the current plan, what was being proposed to be added, which was the first question, I guess. If someone, and most of the submitters, that's basically what submissions were all about. Let's either add something or intensify our approach to managing something. So in each and every case, that was all gone through. What is the status of it? What are the opportunities to actually mitigate the problem? How could it be controlled or not? Or if it could be, at what expense? And if at what expense, how relative to other things on the list that we were committed to doing or that people wanted to add. So it's pretty thorough process was gone through, and as is summarized on a little bit on point 17, I mean, you see what the sort of major issues where we added cats, we dealt with feral goats, there were some flash issues like that. And there were a lot of things that people wanted to either add or elevate. And in some cases, we did that. But in a lot of cases, we stayed the course because of the limits of the resources available to the council to address these in a meaningful way. And so as a result of all of that, I would draw your attention to points 18 and 19. There are some additional expenditures that are generated out of the decisions that we made. Not remarkably high, $72,500, and that will be sought in the annual plan process next time around. So I think there was a balancing job done here of deciding just how far would a limited resource go and where should the priorities actually be applied. And so I think I'm prepared to stand behind this report as a panel member and recommend it to you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo Councillor Belford's comments, especially around Mark, the work that you put in. I thought it was excellent, and everything we asked for, you came up trump, so it's really cool. And working with Mr. Simmons was an absolute pleasure. Was a good lesson to me on how these sorts of panels could be facilitated. I agreed that he went through everything with a fine-tooth comb. I especially appreciated how he took every single submitter, every single submission quite seriously, and we had to have a discussion on every submission, no matter how outrageously unpractical they were. So really appreciated that, and I really appreciated working with the panel. It was quite enlightening, and I really enjoyed it and learned a lot from it.
Thank you, Chair. I was part of the process up until we got to hearing, and then discovered that Predator Free New Zealand Trust had put a submission in to annihilate cats, which I tend to agree with, but meant I had to recuse myself from the hearing process, but happy to be part of it again now. I just want to commend the Councillor Belford and Bailey and Mr Simmons, and certainly Mark and staff, for sticking to their guns on a couple of these things, because there was quite a concerted attack from the cat lobby, if you would like to call them that, to leave poor old Pussy alone. And I think there was a bit of intestinal fortitude in this council. I don't think we've heard the last of it, though.
Any other speakers? I'd just like to say, before we go back to Tom, if he requires it, this is a serious document, and we have met the challenges that needed to be met. And it says something for all of you that were sat around the table and helped develop this report, and to our team of Hawke's Bay Regional Council, Mark and Ken. This really does tackle the issues, the hard issues, and that's what we need to do, so well done. Tom, do you want to wind up, or you?
I would just add that we had some really heavy-duty submitters. I mean, we had Doc and Forrest and Bremer, Federated Farmers. There were, people brought in pretty serious concerns and were well equipped to argue their case and what have you. So it was a very interesting process.
And the Cat Foundation, don't forget the Cat.
The cat delegation from Auckland came down to see us.
From Auckland?
Yeah.
Came from Auckland.
Okay, all those
Anyway.
in favour? We have a movement and second. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Well done,
I
guys.
just have a question before you go. I chopped off things very quickly. I thought this was an outstanding report, but what I'm worried about now is, having adopted this, what is the next steps to socialise this and gain public support for it? So what do we do after this?
Publicly notified.
Can I suggest we come back with a report, probably to Environment Services Committee at some point, just around the communications plan for this? Is that, rather than deal with it now? Or?
Yes, I want to know, because it would be great, not just a communications plan, a plan which takes a step so there's good community ownership of this. Because if this is going to work well, we all have to buy in to do our bit. So I think it comes up in some social media broadcast.
Sure.
Yeah, no, it's very correct. I think in Wellington they issuing traps to people, aren't they?
Oh,
and that's what we want to do.
Exactly right. The people out there trapping things, doing things.
Trap the neighbours.
Yeah, it's going really well. It's become a community thing to do this stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Fenton has just reminded me, this still can be appealed.
Ah,
I mean, right?
I guess it possibly might be.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
We're just publicly notifying it now.
yeah, we're just notifying it.
Yeah, that's right.
But I'm moving on.
Yeah. So, well, you unanimously supported that. Thank you very much.
Sorry, there's just one other thing which is actually of a technical nature, and it's the comment here, 28.6. Given the nature and significance of the issue to be considered and decided, and also the persons likely to be affected by it, etc., etc., Council can exercise its discretion to make a decision without consulting directly with the community or others having an interest in the decision. I thought that's what we'd done.
Yeah, no, that's very, very fair. I mean, there has been an extensive consultation process leading up to this decision, so...
So I think we need to be take a bit more care with these.
Can I just make the comment, though, that I think that's in relation to our significance and engagement policy, which triggers the consultation requirements under the Local Government Act. The consultation here has been undertaken under the Biosecurity Act, and so we're in a situation where we've met those tests, but we're not seeking to meet those tests under the LGA. And I know that sounds a bit bureaucratic, but that's the distinction.
Understand that?
Because then you need a hearing commission.
But I think Peter's point is right. What it seems to be is that this has been a cut and paste job. And given what we've done here, it's actually not a cut and paste job. We should some variation.
So the risk is that if we trigger the provisions under the LGA, then we have to do a special consultative procedure under the LGA when we've already satisfied the Biosecurity Act.
Well, it doesn't even mention the LGA there.
I think
Oh,
it's
it does
but-
up above. It does.
Yeah,
What-
they're all
what-
tests
it's a
under the
good point,
LGA.
Peter. It does appear to mention that. I don't think we'll try to explain it anymore, James. So we'll move to item 7, regional planning, and you can explain all that, James.
Yeah.
Okay, Chair, the focus of the RPC was largely on the 31st of October, the tank plan change, and we went through in some detail the issues around nutrients, drinking water, stormwater, and a draft version of the Section 32 analysis was made available. We got some direction for version 8 of the draft plan change, which will now be coming to the Regional Planning Committee on the 12th of December, and we've got a number of matters which Council itself had asked for further work to be done. That work's now been done. It was reported back here and is now to be included in the next draft. There was also some decisions in relation to the progressive implementation plan for the NPS-FM, and I think the thing that's worth noting there is that we're acknowledging that full implementation of our plan changes under the NPS will not be achieved by 2025, and I think so we are under the NPS able to push that out to 2030, and that's a consequence both, in my view, of the time that it's taken to get the tank plan changed to the point it is, and also as a consequence of the council adopting a catchment by catchment approach and a thorough community-led development approach to each of those plan changes, which will invariably take us some years to get right through the whole region. There was another couple of items on the agenda for discussion around the RPC review and a brief discussion on the fact that we've had some of the some feedback from some parties, and we'll be bringing that process to a conclusion in the not too distant future. And we also had a presentation on the Māori view of water from Ricky Ellison.
I'll just add to that. I personally thought Ricky Ellison's presentation was outstanding. It wasn't just on water, it was on a whole raft of things. He really did confirm my own personal prejudices. I totally 100% agreed with his view of the world, which is not the view that some of our talented whenua have. So I thought that was a really interesting presentation. So, questions or thoughts?
Which
Neil, you
personal
have one.
prejudices did he confirm of yours?
You were there.
I'm not sure which one's on the list.
How long was the list?
That's right.
No, he confirmed that the importance of regional decisions, or the importance of mana whenua making their own decisions.
All right.
That's what he confirmed.
Right.
It's not the world view that we have in Hawke's Bay. Okay, Neil, you have some worries about some of this.
Well, yes, Mr. Chair, I not in any desire whatsoever to hold up the tank process in this regard, given the mileage we've had to expend to get here. But I want to go to paragraph 3.3. We're about to confirm the recommendation to make the plan change and decisions that we considered the RPC. And at 3.3 we've got include provisions for managing drinking water as proposed to the 31st of October 18 RPC meeting. And I raised that issue then, and I'm still significantly concerned about what's being proposed. And in regard to, and I'd just like to ask the question about, I don't know whether you're in a position to answer this actually. What's being stated is that under the region, the source protection zone, a 2 kilometre zone that carries with it significant burdens on surrounding landowners and their use of their land and use of their wells and other activities. So I'm concerned that, for example,
the conditions that'll be imposed, the new conditions imposed about what any activities in those zones which there are some protections that can be imposed that are unstated, number one, and then some specific issues. For example, if you want to put a bore down in those zones, number one, it's controlled activity. The bore cannot be located in the protection zone. So what we've got is very significant chunks of land that will have restraints on them that will greatly affect those landowners, all for the sake of the sins of the Hastings District Council and their maintenance of their own bore. We've got an example here where the Napier City Council water take in Miani is something like 80 metres deep through an impervious layer, and yet this proposal would mean that those landowners for 2 kilometres would be severely constrained in a whole host of activities. And I'm just seeing jeopardy in us progressing this with such unknowns and restrictions applying to those landowners.
So look, my understanding is that the 2 kilometre perimeter is a default provision that is proposed to be in there in the event that Napier City Council does not have a site-specific plan, but they have committed to developing that, and that work is underway. So in all likelihood, the default provision won't apply, but it is at this point included in the plan to ensure that in the event they don't complete their work, that there is an arrangement. Look, I'd note that this is just inclusion into the next version of the draft. The Section 32 analysis looking at the costs and benefits on this piece still needs to be completed because this has only been added in latterly. So we are some way off decision making on this. So the committee will have opportunities to see the costs and benefits of these provisions before making any decision about whether to adopt it for notification. So there's a bit of water to go under the bridge there, and I'm happy to ensure that at the next meeting of the committee you get a more full-blown explanation for where this is at.
This is an adoption in principle.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, it is. But look, we are, and it's adoption in principle for consultation, in particular with the territorial authorities, and that is their opportunity to more formally respond to what's proposed in here, and we would expect that their concerns on these matters will be, taken into account before we get to a version for formal notification. So we've got a way to go on that.
But I would add, both TAs were represented in the town process, specifically in the development of the drinking water aspects of this, and then had another go at it as constituents of the Joint Technical Committee on Drinking Water. And this has gone through a bunch of layers at this point to get to the place where it is at this juncture, with everybody seeming to be on board.
Except Neil.
Well, and likely to be all those landowners who weren't represented.
That'll be interesting.
Well, and look, they'll have an opportunity, obviously, through the formal notification of the plan change to submit and provide their views, etc. But look, we have got a default provision here, and it comes largely from the Habitat North Water Inquiry that identified that regional councils, including our own, were not doing any active source protection at all in the surrounding areas of municipal supplies. And while there might be a significant aquitard, every hole in that aquitard presents a risk, and wells that have deteriorated casing somewhere between their target depth and the point of take at the surface pose a risk as well. So the default provisions are strong, and from there you expect them to refine down to reflect more particularly the nature of the risk at that individual site. So, look, I think this has got a wee way to run. I understand your concerns, and I don't think anybody wants to impose costs on residents that are unnecessary to achieve the public health outcomes that we're working for. So, I'm happy to take it offline, and we'll have further discussions with Napier City and the team on this. But I do think that they're actively working on a very specific plan that addresses their very specific risks at their municipal sites.
Any other Questions? Do we have a mover then?
I'll move in that direction, Chair.
Seconder?
I'll second it.
Second. You wish to speak to it?
I'm pleased, following from the discussions we had at the RPC meeting, that Napier City Council would come back with a date when they intend to have their SPs, their source protection zone work completed, which I understand is towards May, June next year. And so, yeah, that was really good.
Rick, do you wish to speak?
I reserve my right.
Any other speakers? Okay, we have a move and a second. All those in favour of the recommendations?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Didn't hear you. Okay, it is passed. We'll move to item 8, recommendations from the Finance and Audit Committee.
All powerful.
All powerful.
All powerful.
All powerful.
You want to talk to it, Neil?
Oh, it's pretty self-evident, Mr Chair. The significant issue is the major activity here is the local government funding agency Sssion, so signing our life away to every calamity that befalls the entire nation will fall on the ratepayers of Hawke's Bay. So I'm quite happy to...
And we've got big shoulders.
Yeah.
And we've got the appointment of an independent member of the Finance Committee, and subject to your approval today, the selection panel recommend that Rebecca Dinwoody be appointed to that committee.
Are you moving the recommendations?
I am.
I'll second it.
Seconder. All those in favour?
Aye.
Not wish to speak anymore, sorry. You've already talked. Do you wish to speak?
I've voted already.
Thank you. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Against? Can you move it? Thank you. Maybe Port Directors appointments. So we've sort of discussed that, but we need to formally resolve it, don't we?
We do, and we need to amend the resolution.
Yeah.
Drop out section of current. To just drop out chin. I think that probably approves extension of current.
Put this up if you don't.
So I think it approves extension of, and just make it straight to Wendy.
Yep.
Until the current director search is completed.
Yep.
Don't you need to add Kristen?
Yeah.
Yep.
We will need to add them.
Separate recommendation.
Yeah.
Wendy
So we need to put it up because it's quite important.
approves.
Policy on the hoof.
Approves the appointment of whatever her
As
name
a
is.
temporary, we don't we have to say that Kristen is a...
Well, I think we use the same wording until the current director.
Oh, I use the same wording, yeah.
Probably can combine it.
Yeah.
Oh no, there we go. That's fine.
Mr Todd Dawson, effective from the 20th of August 2017.
So that should be 2018.
Yes.
Do we have a report from our directors on HBRIC about this? Considered a report from them? They are the shareholders after all.
And we have discussed it, and the HBRIC directors felt that it was, well, we actually have to have the number of directors, but that whilst we're going through this whole process and we don't know really what we're doing, it would be much better to have temporary appointments just to carry us, to keep our numbers in place. Of course, the Chin had said he would stay, but now he's leaving, so he's just brought another little factor in. We'd already agreed to Todd, but now we need to agree to a second one. And Wendy has agreed to stay over, which was the original agreement.
Just to, Chair, just to confirm my understanding, so currently the port's required to have 6 directors under the Port Companies Act. At the moment, we haven't got six directors. We've in fact only got 3?
No, 5.
5.
We've got 5 right now, but today, after this resolution, we'll be back to our 6.
So hang on a minute, so we've been asked to approve 3 though, so currently there's 5 directors. Two of them,
Including Todd, and including Wendy.
Yep. So 2 of them actually haven't been confirmed or approved by us, or one. Wendy's just a carry.
Wendy expires next month.
Next month.
So,
Okay.
so we're rolling it forward.
Yep.
And Todd is retrospective.
Todd's retrospective, and so what's the other one?
Kristen.
Kristen is
from today.
From today, and it's only for a period of about 8 weeks.
Correct.
Until we've gone through and done the director search and all of that particular approvals, right? And the reason we're doing Kristen is she's the chief
He's the CFO.
Chief Financial Officer.
He's the bloke that was sitting there.
Yeah. And because we're doing him temporarily, he doesn't have to go through and learn all about the company and everything else like that. So rather than appointing someone else, say for example you, Chair,
have to do big course.
you don't have to go through the induction stuff. So that's why we've chosen gone that direction. That's cool.
Plus, we have to change the constitution to appoint the chair.
I'll move. We could have pulled someone off the street.
He used it. He was just saying.
I'll be able to second that, Chair.
Yeah, sorry?
Alan,
You'll second it?
I'll second it.
Who moved that? Alan did.
Yeah.
And Fred will second it. All those in favour?
Oh, hang on. What about some discussion debate?
Oh, do you want discussion and
Yeah,
debate on it?
absolutely.
I thought we already had that this morning. Okay, righty, we're going to move in a second it now. Councillor Curtin.
Yeah, well, Mr Chair, I do want to make this comment that the poor old public of Hawke's Bay, and this is borne out by the submissions made, are under this delusion that somehow this council has got this wonderful control over its shareholding in the port. Well, this very exercise demonstrates that we don't. The council itself has received this skimpy notice about the appointment of these directors. Then they are transacted second-hand to us via the directors of HBRIC. So we've had very little input whatsoever in the appointment of these directors. And I make the point, Mr Chair, that this is a situation that should rest at the end of the day to a much greater extent than it has with the councillors around this table. And it's a great disappointment to see this process that we pledged to have greater involvement end up in the situation where, in fact, we do not have power, we do not have influence, we do not have the control that the public expect us to have.
I'll just counter that. We're in the process of appointing 3 directors. We have employed a recruitment company to go...
Who's we? HBRIC.
HBRIC has. And there'll be no permanent appointments without coming back to the council. And I think you raised that you wanted to see the list of who applied, and we'll be probably quite happy to do that. I have not seen anything yet, but in the interim period, we need 6. Whilst we go through that process, which we must be over halfway through, and we will be referring back to council when we do. Council is really close to this.
Seconded, Chair. I have a contrary view to Councillor Curtin. I think we've demonstrated great expediency in total control in keeping the complement of directors there, considering there was a resignation on Friday, and well, look at this. On Wednesday, we've tidied everything up. So Councillor Curtin needs to have a wee think about that.
I think so too.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I agree with the decisions that were made to appoint the two people, Todd and I've forgotten the other name now, Kristen, retrospectively, I would have liked to have seen an email come around and just asking if that's okay for that to happen. So and then formalise it today, because I'm like Councillor Curtin. We've not been part of that decision-making process, and really, as councillors, we should have been.
Very tardy.
I think so. Tom?
I would just like to see the job description or whatever the advertising was for this position, because I actually don't often read Hawke's Bay Today, it's just the back pages of it.
And put in Bay Buzz.
And it wasn't advertised in Bay Buzz, so I missed it there. But seriously, I can recall a meeting a few times back where I tabled some illustrations of who sits on boards of ports in the U.S. And it's a quite different approach to what governance should include in terms of this type of public asset. And I'm not sure that's what the modality of thinking is in the group that is driving this process at the moment, that we have to have professional directors who have, carted luggage on port wharfs to be qualified to govern an institution like this. So I personally, when we get to the point of looking at what Blair referred to as good candidates, would like to have I want to be reassured that we have actually considered what the breadth of governance requirements are on a community asset like this.
Here, here.
I have some strong sympathy with that view, and had a little bit to do with altering the ad to reflect that. Not as successful.
Second speech.
Sorry. Can't you hear me, Councillor?
Okay.
I have some strong sympathy with that view, Tom. There's no doubt about that. Any other comments? How terrible a job Peter and I have done?
Well, I just want to make one observation. I feel some sympathy with the people because they got told today, or yesterday, that someone wasn't available for a job. There's no ability to prior notice that. But I thought this is entirely consistent with how we live our life. It's like playing rugby. We've just got a bench. We shift them on and off.
Make sure you pass the ball to the wing. Okay. So.
We've got to move and second it.
We're going to move and second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Temporary point. Aye. It's carried unanimously. Okay.
Yeah, right.
I wasn't looking your direction. Okay, fixing the common seal. Yeah, we'll
Moved. Seconded.
Moved, was it?
Yep.
Moved and seconded.
Aye.
All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Oh, we'll fix the common seal. Okay, item 11. Report from the Environment and Services Committee. Tom, do you want to...
Well, this is a short little, nice little one-page summary, and I don't think I've seen any minutes, draft minutes, I'm sure, from this meeting, so I'm not sure I want to add anything from recollection here. I believe there's some concern that simply what are we being asked to do here? Just receive the report of the...
Yeah. Don't know why it's not up top.
So, without...
Those are no decision items.
Without knowing what any of the recommendations were under these bullet points, I can't really add much to the memo.
So look, my understanding from this is there were no decision items. These were all information items, but I can't categorically confirm that.
That's what I'm looking
Says
for.
article.
It seems that was the case as I look at the agenda here from the committee meeting. There were some pretty substantial discussions about the integrated catchment management, about the Ahuriri, the presentation we got from the Napier Council, also about the Tuki Water Task Force update. I think those were the three that we actually put at the top of the agenda for the most consideration, but I don't recall there being any actions arising from any of those.
So it was a bit of a talk fest, Tom.
So that was my
No
speech.
decisions.
That's it.
I'm happy to move the adoption of the report with an amendment which I've put up here.
But what's the amendment? Where's the amendment?
It's the whole lot.
Oh, the whole lot.
Yeah.
Oh, the whole lot's the amendment.
Yeah.
Do we have time to read this, or is this just
Well, it's,
bushwhacked us?
no, I haven't. I've been open and transparent. It's up there on the thing. So it can't be any better than that. And it reflects the what was the discussion on the day. We noted the Ahuri stormwater, wastewater presentation by Napier City. We confirmed the request that we made at the time for the two councils to collaborate on sharing the data, because there was some quite contentious discussions at the time about the data, about what it meant. I don't agree with the interpretations they supplied to us at all, right off the stick. They were trying to tell us that the incoming tide was bringing the problems in. So I want to register our council's concern on the overflow of effluent from the sewage system that occurs at regular intervals, as it does, by rainfall. The rainfall is not extreme, and that there's no effective remediation being done for quite some time. This is a decades-old problem. We welcome the proposed investment to address the sewage overflows, and note that in all probability it's going to continue for a time, and that further development in the area is going to exacerbate it. So we simply then request that Napier City Council take all possible steps to ensure the sewage spills no longer occur in the Ahuri Lagoon, and it does nothing that exacerbates this problem. I think this is entirely reasonable. What we were told on the day was that this was...
Point of order, Chair. No one seconded it. No one seconded it.
Yeah, that's a second. You moved the amendment, he seconded the amendment, so you want to talk to him.
Yeah, well, what we were told on the day that this was a legacy issue, that somehow it had fallen upon the Napier City Council like a bequest from a great aunt or someone that arrived completely unexpectedly. Well, this is not true. This has been known for quite some time. And I was personally seriously disappointed that this issue arose because we were looking through a number of issues arising out of consents and consents which had failures. As questioning of councillors which brought this to their attention, this was an event that happened from time to time. It was not brought to our attention directly. It was just simply a problem that occurred and everybody swept it under the carpet. I think people would be appalled in Napier and in Taradale to know that their sewage systems were such that they were unable to cope with a significant rainfall. Not something disaster, significant. I think they would be appalled. This is, in my opinion, a failure of leadership. It's not a question of having no money or other opportunities. There's been huge investments made before. It's not been done. But putting sewage plants isn't a sexy job. Building other things is. But we are here as a regulator, and we would be in dereliction of our duty if we didn't put a clear marker down that we expect councils in our area to comply to the reasonable minimum standards, if not better. And this is currently not one of those. So do not accept that it's a legacy issue that's suddenly fallen out of the sky. This is an issue that's been there for a long time and been well known. The other thing we were told is that they're not the only people there, that there are sheep on in the Ahiri area, or on the farms, and they defecate on the land, and this gets washed into the water. And so therefore, somehow it's a problem that's shared. Well, I don't agree with that either. What we're talking about here is human excrement. That's what we're talking about, and we are responsible for it, the sheep aren't. Yes, we've got problems with ducks and other things that defecate in the lagoon too, that's true, but that's part of the natural process. We have a responsibility here to make these things right. And I have very strong views about this. It's just one of my personal prejudices, and it goes back to when I was a kid. The town I lived in had sewage systems which failed. The town had to go and get them upgraded, couldn't afford it. So the mayor with the miners in the area decided they'd take the heavy lifting, cut the cost by every night after work they'd come and dig down their street for the pipes to be connected. That's what they did. Fixed the problem. Fixed it so well that when Sandra Lee came in as the Minister of the Environment, upped the standards on sewage disposal, the town I lived in had to do nothing to fix its sewage system. Napier and Hastings, both cities, had to spend millions and millions on upgrading the sewage systems. I have this firm view that every community should look after its effluent. It's responsible, it does it, and does it the highest standard, and does not let it slide, pump, slip into the environment. That's my view. And I think this is a problem which has been overlooked too long, and we need to take a stand on it, be very clear. We're the council, we're the regulator. We need to make a clear statement. And nothing will change me from that.
Paul seconded, Alan, then I'll come to you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an issue which has raised serious concerns with constituents in Napier for me, or they have approached me about this particular issue, which has been ongoing for them and obviously for us. And whilst I appreciate the presentation given by Napier City Council the week or so ago, and I especially appreciate the fact that they actually gave us some timing around the monies they're intending to spend. It's hard to know whether that's enough and whether it's going fast enough. And I also think that as the regulator, we're the guys that are supposed to be casting an eye over these things. We need to keep our eyes on the ball. We need to keep the pressure on Napier City Council to do these things as they've promised to do. And I believe that this particular motion, again, highlights that issue and makes sure that we as a council keeps looking at this in the serious way that it should be looked at. And I think also the public of Napier need the reassurance that we're actually going to be doing that, because that's something that I keep on hearing about too, is that we seem to be doing nothing. And whilst I know that we do, I think, again, I can point to something like this particular motion and say, yeah, we recognise what you're asking us to do and what we should be doing.
Alan first and then Peter.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'll support this, but I'd just like to note that at the meeting itself, Councillor Barker was quite vociferous and gave the submitters pretty much a hard time. Whether they deserve it or not, I'm not going to venture an opinion on this. But what I'd like to say is that I really hope that Councillor Barker will be consistent, and when we're dealing with the Hastings District Council in regard to the Clive River, that he will take a similar and very strong attitude.
Currently. Thank you. Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to vote against this on the basis that Councillor Barker can poke his head up Napier pipes and stand on the hustings in his own time, not council time.
Okay, I just got to absorb that. Then Tom.
I'm going to support it for the contrary reason. Particularly with respect to item 3, we did begin to see the seeds of potential discord as to what's the nature of the problem here we're trying to fix. And if there's anything, I think we have a right to expect at this stage of the game, after about a decade now of more seriously struggling with water issues, is that we agree on the science of what in fact is going on in these different situations, so that we can get on with it. And that to me is the one action step that is included in those or reinforced in those points 2 through 6. But I would also support the rest of it, because I do think, as opposed to various occasions that some of us have taken, including me, to chastise or express our views about what appears to be a slow remediation process on the part of the Napier City Council, I think it is important for us to state as a council that we have those concerns, and it's not just the occasional idiosyncratic griping of one or another counselor, that this is something as regulators we do take seriously. We want to be formally on the record that these are the concerns we have about the matter, and I'd welcome a similar resolution on Hastings. I'd welcome a similar resolution regarding CHP and its sewage. The first public meeting I went to around a water issue in Hawke's Bay was in 2007, and it was about crap coming from central Hawke's Bay down the Tukey River. And we are still doing the Great Water investigation, reviewing for about the 3rd or 4th time in 10, 11, 12 years what's the right solution to getting central Hawke's Bay's crap out of the Tukey. So I'm kind of tired of waiting for that, and I would welcome a resolution with a little bit of tinkering of the words to deal with Central Hawke's Bay as well.
Mr Chair.
No one's talked about Wairau yet, but...
Yes, there's going to be, but wait, there's still time.
Neil, you're on, mate.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm delighted that I'm getting support from Councillor Barker, and he can come and stick his head up our pipes anytime he likes.
He is.
And I think it's important to continue as a wider group of councillors, or the whole council in fact, to continue to raise this issue, put it on the agenda up front and centre, because there are elements of management direction, governance around wastewater, stormwater in the Napier City that need urgent attention and need a concerted effort from this council to resolve. The issue, not to traverse any further ground, is the issue that's not included there is the discharge to the coast, and I think we not only should focus on discharge into the lagoon, but also what's happening around the consents to discharge from the main sewage systems and to protect better our coastal marine environment from those discharges. It's a matter of out of sight, out of mind, but there are impacts there that we should also continue to have on board. But this goes across the board. This is where Wairau does come in, is that these issues are not confined just to Napier. They are right across the region, and we ought to have the same, if you like, loud voice on all of our local authorities and in terms of their discharges and their management of waste and stormwater. So I applaud the efforts of Councillor Barker in this regard, and agree with Councillor Belford that the same message should be circulated with a change of local authority name on the top of this note to our colleagues around what our expectations are going forward for the effluent that humans put into the environment. We shouldn't absolve ourselves from responsibility just because some other animals happen to be doing their thing in the waterways. We're the only animals that can control what we're doing in that regard.
Do we have our perspective here, Mr. Moy?
Gotta go. Sort of sounds like tickle to me.
I'd like to make a comment. It is correct to say that right across our region, right across the country, everyone is struggling with wastewater and sewage. We certainly have really interesting challenges in Wairau. We have interesting challenges in Central Hawke's Bay, and Hastings and Napier are known to at extreme water events, rain events, which are not that extreme. And I agree with Councillor Barker. We do put raw sewage into the Karamu or into the Ahuri estuary, and in the long term it's just not good enough. It has to change. So I will support this, even though I thought the Napier presentation was very good, and I know that they're trying to confront the problem and they recognise the problem, and I thought that was a very good presentation. But nevertheless, our role is to keep everybody's to the fire on this, and it's about time we probably did it a little bit more stricter. So I will support it personally. Councillor Barker, do you wish to wind up?
I do. A couple of closing remarks. Can I just say I was challenged as to whether I would treat Hastings fairly and others. Just to assure Councillor Dick, I will treat this without fear or favour, ill will, affection on this issue. I will get the same service from me. And that's been my record. When Hastings had some trouble before on sewage, I told the Mayor I did not support them appealing the decision against them. They were going to go all the way to the Privy Council. I said I oppose that. The council is simply wrong. It needs to get there and fix it. Do I have a record of helping in this area? Yes, I do. The regional council here had a one-off huge gift from the Port of Napier in tune of something close to $100 million. which the then Chief Executive was going to distribute equally to every ratepayer. I argued against that and said it should be put in for major projects, and took through the House a local bill which saw tens of millions of dollars given to both Napier Council and to Hastings Council, primarily to fix their sewage schemes. Now, they got a one-off fix here to fix their sewage schemes at no cost to them, and what have they done in the intervening decade? I grant you, very little. Because I just come to the point again, people like to go and see things which are monuments to their glory. Build great structures where they go along there with the grandkids and say, I built that. There are very few civic leaders who are prepared to go along and say, see that sewage system over there? All those underground pipes? I did that. I'm very happy about that. There's just not the sex appeal in it. And that's our problem. People will spend money on other things, but not this. And we have to draw a very firm line on this. On this, I'm very clear that the public are with us on this. I have no doubt the people of Taradale would be appalled to know that their sewage system doesn't work properly, and they'd expect their civic leaders to fix it. That's where I think the thing is, the public. And if you haven't doubt this, I got monstered one time by the Paku brothers about this, the lot of them, at that wonderful place, the RSA in Hastings, and got a proper doing over because of the failing of the sewage systems in Hawke's Bay and pumping human sewage into Hawke Bay. And they were right on every occasion. They were right. We are failing, but we can do better. We just have to put our resources somewhere else to fix these problems, which aren't sexy problems, but are fundamental. We need to draw a line.
Thank you, Councillor. That's very accurate. Okay, we have a recommendation to accept the findings, receive it actually, and we're replacing item 2 with the.
Well, there's only one recommendation, which will now make that number 1, and then we add everything 2 to 6.
Yeah, that's right.
Just a Chair, is a typo in 5.1. We've got into that.
Yeah. Okay, so everyone's clear what we are going here. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
Thank you very much.
Mr Chairman, you've moved out of debate now, so I'm just wondering if I can just make a brief comment in relation to that issue that just been discussed, and it's really just for councillors' awareness. We'll bring some more formal advice to you on this shortly, but the government has recently released its cabinet paper around the future arrangements of Three Waters, and contained in that is a particular focus on the regulation of Three Waters. So some of this came out of the Hamilton North Drinking Inquiry, but it now includes wastewater and stormwater. And we're getting a series of extremely pointed questions from central government, all regional councils are, around our performance in terms of the regulation of particularly stormwater and wastewater. And the inference from the questions is that regional councils need to be doing much better, and that potentially the RMA needs strengthening in terms of our regulatory oversight of territorial authorities and the performance of their infrastructure. So I guess it's just really to let you know that the policy machinery is moving in response to some of these wider societal concerns. And one of the things that is of concern to the regional council CEs is we've recently done a piece of work. We contracted Dr. Marie Brown, previously of the Environmental Defence Society, who's regarded as something of an expert and a highly independent expert around the performance of compliance, monitoring and enforcement in the environmental management area. And that review has shown that regional councils perform better than territorial authorities and perform better than central government agencies in performing their compliance, monitoring and enforcement activity under New Zealand's various environmental regulations. So we're actually best in class in terms of our performance, but we've got the biggest target on our backs right now because of, in part, the Havelock North experience, but also more widely these concerns nationwide about wastewater entering into stormwater networks and getting into environments like the Ahuriri estuary. So I guess it's really just to say that the concerns raised around this table are being shared at the national level, and despite our strong performance in this area, we are under significant scrutiny for whether or not we've done our job well enough.
Mr. Chairman, could I just query, is it likely that our powers would be increased? I mean, a lot of the debate we've had over the last few years around the Central Hawke's Bay discharges have had to do with our apparent inability to say, to instruct solutions, to say, wait a minute, you know, you're heading down the wrong path. This is what needs to be done. Here's what the best solution would be. Bite the bullet, put the money in, get it done. We have had to sort of massage the process and urge them to look at alternatives and whatever. Is that going to change?
So the regional council sector is arguing for strengthened powers. Unfortunately, at the moment, the perception of central government is that we have all the powers we need, but it's a lack of political will that has driven this, which is leading to a proposal from central government to set up within the Environmental Protection Authority a separate regulator to do the job that they perceive that we're not doing. Yeah. And that is, I wouldn't say it's an existential threat to regional councils given our very broad range of other things that we do, but the risk is our ability to do integrated catchment management is somewhat compromised because a key element of our regulatory function is taken off us. So that the heat is really on, and I think that's a useful message for our territorial authorities to hear and understand, and they may prefer to have us as the regulator than a regulator in Wellington.
Okay. Sorry, can I just ask, did you say that you were going to bring a summary of that?
Yeah, we'll bring some advice. Look at the cabinet paper popped out 2 weeks ago, and you know we've looked at it. We just haven't had a chance to pull a paper together. Okay, councillors, we're going to move into public excluded now. Can someone move that we move into public excluded? We're going to, as I noticed.
Do we have to make a note of the people that are attending, or
We do?
Yes, we do.
Okay, Peter's moved.
I've moved.
Paul, you second?
With the addition of our guests.
Yeah, with the addition, and we'll note our guests who are attending. Paul, you second?
Yeah.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
We're now in public
Against?
excluded, are we?
You're against? Okay, thank you.